Hey everyone, welcome to our next episode in the Good Deeds Day Facebook Live mini-series where I see my teeth are blue from the background. In this series, we're having conversations with our partners all over the world about the projects being done during the corona pandemic and how their focus has changed. And we're going to be sharing lots of tips for you for wherever you are in the world. I'm Hannah Bueno, and together with Kanan Rubino, we lead International Good Deeds Day. So you might actually recognize my guest today, Tova Garr, Global Partnerships Coordinator at Good Deeds Day, and often the interviewer in this Facebook Live mini-series. But Tova wears another hat as well. She is the founder and CEO of From Girls to Women, an organization dedicated to strengthening the parent-teen relationship, focusing on communication and the challenges of growing up in a digital world. So first, Tova, welcome to this side of the Facebook Live series.
Thank you very much. It's a little weird, I will admit, being on this side after spending so many times interviewing other people, but I'm really glad to be here today talking about this really important topic.
Likewise, me too. I'm excited to delve in. And today's edition is actually going to be quite different than the others. If you've tuned in or caught our other Facebook Live sessions where we've interviewed different leaders from around the world, today we're going to be talking about families during the pandemic, tips for dealing with the lockdown, and things to be aware of as we emerge out of this lockdown. Now, this is going to be super relevant for everybody. So regardless if you're living with family or living alone, we're going to be addressing both. And so this is going to be really relevant for anyone, no matter your situation. And before we dive in and get any further, whether you're joining us live right now or catching us at a later date, please say hi in the comments and let us know who you are and where you're from. And feel free to just ask any questions or give any comments. We would definitely love to hear from you. So let's start off, Tova, with you sharing a bit about how From Girls to Women came to be and your mission.
Sure. So if I'm completely and totally honest, From Girls to Women started kind of as a mistake. It wasn't intentional in any way. I spent my whole career working with teens and young adults, mostly in the nonprofit world, really helping teens and young adults figure out their identity, figure out who they are, where they belonged in this world, working with educators, parents, people who worked with teens, helping them understand teens, helping them reimagine their organizations and working with teens to make them more relevant to the world that we live in. And at the time I was living in New York and I was the head of an organization as in the teen department, doing work in the greater New York area and really all around the United States and actually the world on really innovative teen education. And I found myself this one weekend flying. My life was a little crazy at the time. I was on the plane a lot. And I went from teaching a conference, empowering educators, to a conference over the weekend that was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I was in Washington, D.C. at a conference where I was empowering myself, surrounded by women from the age about 20 to 70, who were really exploring, in that case, by the way, how we can erase poverty in the world through advocacy and education. That was the topic of the conference. But I was there with a group of women who were all on this journey of self-empowerment. And from there, I went to Philadelphia to teach in a conference, again, which was teaching educators how to empower youth. And I remember this one moment at the conference, and I was sitting there, and one of the women said, I wish I had this when I was a teenager. And then this light bulb went on in my mind, and I said, wait a second, right? There's this huge gap that exists in really everywhere in the world, where at the time that we need our parents most, which is when we're teenagers, and life is hard and it's complicated, and we're trying to figure out who we are and where we belong in this world and what we believe in, is when we stop talking to our parents, right? Part of that is because naturally as teenagers, our job is to fight our parents and figure out who we are. And part of that process is telling our parents they don't know anything and we know better, but that's when we need them most. And most parents don't know what to do. And so they pull back. There's a lot of fighting. There's a lot of disagreement. And I know teens and young adults so well. What if and by the way, at this point, I already knew I was moving on from this organization. So I was thinking about what was next in my life. And I said, what would happen if I could bridge that gap? What would happen if I could help, first of all, teens where they're at when they were struggling, because I know how to talk to them? And what if I could help parents understand where their teens were at today? So that's how kind of From Girls to Women started in the first place. And then it has merged and changed. And the focus of the work that I do today, while I still focus a lot on the parent and teen dynamic and communication, I focus a lot on what it means to live in a digital world. And that happened because I found that about 80% of the people that I was talking to would come to me, and in one way or another, whether they were aware of it or not, and by the way, a lot of times they weren't aware of it, the source of the challenge that they were having had to do with whether it was phones, whether it was video games, other aspects of social media and social media entering our lives. And so I decided to really dig deep and learn a lot about it, and realized that there was a tremendous gap that had to be bridged, and had to be bridged now. We could no longer say, you know what, they're teenagers, it's fine, they'll get over it. No, we can't do that anymore. We have to talk to our teens. We have to bridge that gap. So that's kind of how I found myself in this situation.
Well, first, I think that's really interesting that you're trying to merge this communication gap, and especially with social media today, it's very different. It's not like how it was, 40, 50 years ago, even 20 years ago. It's very different. And so paint us a picture of pre-corona, what that looked like in terms of the work that you're doing with the parents and the teens.
Sure. So pre-corona, first of all, the work that I do is in a lot of ways. I actually work globally, which fits beautifully with the work that I do at Good Deeds Day. The majority of the work that I do is online. Sometimes I really do in-person workshops and fly to a community and work with them. But what I try to do in the work that I do is I work with teens, I work with parents, and I work with educators, trying to cover all parts that are really trying to give a holistic approach to what it means to work with teens. And so when I work with private clients, I work with parents and teens. We work together, we work alone, bridging the gap. And what I try to do in the work that I do is take this time period of life, as I was saying before, which is the most important time in our life of decision making. This is when we decide who we are, right? Teens have one job. And by the way, teens used to be 12 to 18, or 12 even to 14 or 16 when they would get married. Today, in research, teens are defined as 8 to about 26. Okay,
Wow.
so you may be listening to us right now and you're like, what? I'm defined as a teen? Yeah, it's a huge time period. And your teen, your child's job at that time in life is to figure out, as I was saying, who they are and where they fit in this world. And what that means is that the first thing they're going to do is they're going to take the people that they admire the most, and that is their parents, and everything that they've learned, and question everything, right? And question everything and rethink everything. That's why when we see teens and you say something, but you've done something different, they're very quick to point that out to you, because they're very big on, but that's not true, or that's not fair, and that's, you're not living your truth, because they're trying to figure out how to live their own truth and what their own truth is. And that's also why teens have this incredible power to change the world, right? I interviewed, and we interviewed in our series earlier on, right? The Nest for Us girls, who are doing incredible work changing the world and volunteering. And they're a perfect example of that. The power and the belief that teens have before they become cynical, before they get tired of of life, what they can do in the world is incredible. And so my goal in the work that I do is to help families and help educators bring their teens to be like those girls, right? Be teens who are harnessing the power that they have, the strengths that they have, figuring out who they are in a positive way, as opposed to spending their time fighting and arguing and really struggling within their family dynamic or within their community. How can we shift that? And I think that will benefit all of society, and definitely benefit families and family dynamics, because who likes to come home from a long day of work and just fight, right? Nobody. It's not fun. You'd rather come home and like snuggle up on the couch and hear how somebody's day was, and maybe cook dinner together. Sounds like a lot more fun. So that's what I want to do. And I'll say one more thing before I let us move on, is that as cell phones and access to the internet has become more prevalent in our society. And I moved to New York in 2010 and came back to Israel in 2017. And in that gap, it's incredible to see what has happened, right? And the access that we have. And this is completely changing kids' lives. It's changing their relationships. It's changing what they believe and think about themselves. Anything from body image to belief in themselves and what is possible, for good and for bad. And so we have to learn about that, because most people, if you're old enough to have a kid this age, we did not have this growing up. And so we don't know, right? Even if like you're like me and you're attached to your phone, we still don't know. We still don't get it. So it's our job to learn.
So how has this shifted as people have been in lockdown, as students have been studying from home virtually, as parents are working from the home as well? What has shifted? I mean, what's the dynamic looking like that you've seen?
Right. So if until now, regardless of whether things were good at home or they were challenging, you had a lot of time apart from your kids, right? We would wake up in the morning, either morning routine was easy and simple, or you had to, pull your kid out of bed, wake them up with the alarm clock, with the dog, and with a bucket of water, and finally get them out the door. But then you were separated for a good like 6, 7, 8 hours a day before they came back from school, from their extracurricular activities. And so other than the weekends, we had a lot of time apart. So even if things were very tense, there was a lot of time apart. And now when we found ourselves these, for now a long time in small spaces, even if things were going really good before, there's a good chance that you are fighting a lot more, that things are very stressed. Often when we're in crisis, it's one side that's in crisis and one side that's there to help. So you may not always know how to help or what to say, but it's usually one of the sides that's in crisis. And we're now in a situation where we're all in crisis. This is not normal for any of us. And so we're seeing a lot more tension, a lot more difficulty. And this is true whether you're part of a family or if you're alone, right? There's it living alone and being in your own space and not having your regular normal routine and going out and seeing people can be extremely, extremely difficult. We spoke about that when we spoke about mental health last week with James Lim. So we want to, what I would like before we start with all the tips and advice that we're going to give today, to remind everybody that this is a good time to be kind to yourself, right? Let go of any idea of doing this perfect or doing it right. A lot of us are perfectionists. I like to call myself a recovering perfectionist. I'm working on it. Is that this is a good time to be kind. There's no right answer. You're going to try, you're going to fail. It's a great time for us to learn how to do things, fall down, pick up, and try again in a way that's going to work. So know that you're not in this alone. You're not the only person struggling. It's not that everybody else is doing a great job. I saw this a lot as we kind of entered into the lockdown, and there were parents who had very clear structures and plans and were like doing arts and crafts projects and all these creative stuff. And a lot of parents feeling like they weren't good enough because they had to work from home and work with their kids and try to do online learning, and figure it out all at the same time and deal with the emotional stress that they were feeling and their kids were feeling, and everything was falling apart. So know that that is how almost all of us are feeling, no matter what we're putting out on social media to the world. So be kind to yourself. We'll start off with that.
Well, that's actually, regardless of the topic that we've covered in this series, that has pretty much come up in every single conversation we've had. I mean, from, NGOs and teens to the one last week specifically on the mental health toll. This is something that everyone is experiencing in their personal lives. And so remembering that we need to be easy on ourselves and even be easy on the people around us that we normally interact with, even if we're interacting with them from afar due to lockdowns and the virus, that this is something we need to truly pause and to sink in, that this is the time to be kind and to give yourself a break and to give others one as well.
Yep, 100%. And remember that we're in a dynamic situation, right? The beginning of the lockdown, for many of us was a lot harder maybe than it is right now. for others, maybe at the beginning it was like, wow, this is amazing. I get to spend time at home and I get to spend time with my family. I have downtime. I'm not as busy as I used to be. Maybe for others like me who went to live with her sister, life became extremely busy with no time at all. But things were like, but then maybe later on, when you're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks into this, it already feels extremely overwhelming and not so much fun anymore. So it really depends on the dynamic. Remember that things are changing, they're constantly changing. And so our reaction also needs to be different. I see this in my clients all the time. I have kids who I work with who are thriving right now. They love it. This is like the best gift they could have given. And this client that I have that lives in Canada, they were just told that they're not going to have school back until the spring. And this is like the best news ever for her. She's super happy, right? And then there's another boy that I work with who's like, they're really struggling because he lives on his sports, right? His sports and his friends and his community. And so this is devastating for him, right? Summer camp was canceled for him, and like it's the end of the world. So every person and every kid is different, and we have to be aware of that. So even if you have more than one, they're not all responding the same, and we're not always going to know.
What are some specific things that parents should pay attention to?
So I love that you asked that, because I think paying attention is one of the big keys and things that parents should do, right? So first of all, notice behavioral changes. Right? Is your kid staying in their room more often than they used to? Are they non-responsive? So you try to engage them in conversation or find out what they're doing and they don't really want to tell you, or they're ignoring you. Now, for some of you, mind you, I realize this might have been the situation pre-corona as well. But here you want to be more attentive, right? Notice if there are distinct behavioral changes. That'll be the first indication, because teens tend to show us more in their behavior than they do in the words that they use. We always laugh and say that especially teen boys like to grunt, right? They like to give one-word answers and grunt as answers, which is not very informal. Notice, and this is really, really important, is their social media use. So social media as a whole is something that I encourage everyone every adult that is listening to us right now, whether you have kids or not, should be learning about what teens are going through today, because that is the world that we live in. It's going to be our future employees, etc. You can go to my website. I have many free resources there that you can use to kind of catch you up on where they're at today. But you want to know, are they on more than usual? Are they up till the middle of the night, right? If you're not taking your kid's phone away or their access, are they on their computers until 3 or 4 in the morning, which is something that I had with my clients, right? He said, I don't know what to do. He's playing video games until 4 o'clock in the morning, right? What are they doing online? Do you know? Right? Because this is particularly important, because what we know about online use for teens, and by the way, for adults as well, is that your online use is always a reflection of what's going on in your real world. So if you are, for example, if you're being bullied in the real world by friends and you're being picked on and having a really hard time, you're going to look for friends and companionship and people who understand you online. Okay, that's where you're going to go to seek it, because it's much easier than in person. And by the way, you may also become a bully online because you can. It's a whole nother story we're not going to get into right now. Another conversation. If you are, let's say, curious about your sexuality and you don't have questions, which is a completely natural and age appropriate thing to be doing when you're a teenager and your parents aren't giving you the answers, or you don't feel comfortable talking to your parents, you're going to look online. And so you want to be really attuned to where they are, so you can see where potential dangers are, right? Are they obsessive on Instagram and Snapchat, etc.? Where are they spending their time is really important. And then the last thing I want to mention here, because truthfully we talk about this for an hour, is pay attention to the losses that they're feeling right now. So especially around this time of year when school was supposed to end, depending on where you live in the world, maybe you're going off to summer camp right now, supposed to be going off, or to a family vacation, or other main events that you may have planned, life events, right? If you're Jewish, maybe it was a bar or bat mitzvah, maybe you were supposed to get married, or wedding in the family, any kind of event, and the loss that they may be feeling. Acknowledging that they don't want us to fix their problems, which, by the way, teens mostly don't. They don't want you to fix the problems. They want you to listen, acknowledge them. Don't try to say, oh, it's okay, it's not a big deal, or it'll pass, or we'll make it up at another time. Let them feel the feelings that they're feeling. I think that's important for all of us. If they're sad, let them feel sad. If they're upset, let them feel upset. It's really important to be able to feel those feelings so you can learn how to be more resilient, which is something that we all need right now. We all need to figure out how to up-level our resilience in life, right? And deal with challenging situations, because the reality is that, well, hopefully this will be over soon. Most likely, at least what they're saying is that there'll be another wave of this, right? Sometime in the fall, and it will probably be worse. So we need to be ready for that and whatever else life brings us. So it's a great life skill in general. Let them feel their feelings, even if it feels uncomfortable to you, or if it's painful to watch, because it usually is. We don't like seeing people upset. It's just nature.
Right. And same thing for everybody listening as adults. The same thing is don't minimize these feelings of loss, these events that had to be postponed or canceled, because these feelings are totally legitimate as well.
100%. And I'll share, by the way, the people, I'm getting your permission, even though I haven't asked for it, is that I think that's one of the things we've been really great at our staff meetings, is giving space to say, how are you feeling today, right? Because we have virtual meetings. We're not getting to see each other really very much in person. And so just say, you know what, I'm having a really hard time today. Today is just a bad day, right? I know it'll be better later, but today is a bad day. And being able to sit with that and just acknowledge that is really, I appreciate it. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad. And, with different people, we all experience this craziness in a different way. And some days you might feel really great and top of the world and productive. And other days you might not feel so great. And you might not, be looking forward to the day ahead, or maybe work feels kind of daunting. And it's definitely important to try to recognize that within ourselves, and also within the people around us, that these are just different times and we need to adapt to that. And we need to figure out how we can adapt and give space for others too as well.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the different approaches, Tova, that you recommend to lockdown? Many parts of the world, like where we are in Israel, we're slowly getting out of the lockdown. I mean, things are opening up here, but in the other side of the world, for instance, in the US, things are very much in lockdown. In Latin America, seems that it's getting worse. So what are different approaches that you recommend for those that are in it?
Okay, so what I'll say to that is I think that there are really two different kinds of approaches. And as I was saying earlier, something like this here might work first, and then you're going to want to switch it up. Okay, so don't be like, oh, this is what works, and then 3 or 4 weeks later, you're like, this isn't working anymore, right? So the two different approaches are, one of them is actually creating a schedule. Create a schedule with clear expectations. I expect everybody, we get up at 8, we get dressed. First of all, in general, for everybody, I don't recommend that you stay in your pajamas all day, as tempting as it is. If you want to do it, you can occasionally have pajama days. But as a rule, people should be getting up and getting dressed. It's really important for just our mental well-being. So again, with just, at 8 o'clock this, 10 o'clock you have math class, let's say, on your online learning. Then like at 1 o'clock, I expect you to empty out the dishwasher, with just clear expectation of what the day looks like and what the plan is. That's one approach. The other approach is actually kind of saying free flow, which is, I'm going to let you manage your time however you want. And by the way, the older your kids are, the more this is probably a better approach of, here are the things that need to happen, right? I expect you to do your homework. I expect you to attend the classes that you do have online. I expect you to do your chores at home. Do them at whatever pace and whatever way works for you. I just want to check in, let's say at 6 o'clock in the evening, where you report to me what you've done and what you haven't done. And no matter what approach you take, you want to make sure that, first of all, that there's great communication, and maybe later I can give some tips for good communication. but that in both cases, the expectations are clear. Okay, it's clear what you expect of your kids, no matter what the situation is, because one of the places where there's always a downfall is in that gap of communication. So I can share with you, with one of my clients that I worked with, I spoke with a father, and he was like, we had a family meeting and we talked about what was next, and everything, everything's great. I feel like we're on a new page, because he was really very disappointed in his kid's behavior. And then I spoke to one of the kids and I said, how was the meeting? Oh, the meeting was much better than I expected. I was like, great, thinking, oh, great, right? There's an alignment here. And I was like, so what do you need to do next? Like, what are the expectations? He's like, oh, I have no idea. I was like, so what are you going to do? I don't know. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing and hopefully it'll be okay until it explodes again. I was like, that's not the goal, right? If the other side, whoever that other side is, by the way, whether that's your kids, that's your partner, whoever it is, if they don't know what you're expecting of them, then everything you've done and all the hard work doesn't actually matter. So you always want to get a verbal confirmation and have them speak back to you what they understood of what you said, and then you'll really know if they got it or not. So some things that I have found that work. Okay, this is what I found that works. First of all, use the time to talk about the important things. There are a lot of important things that we don't have time on a regular basis, or we keep putting off, and we don't talk to our teens about. And that is everything from, I'm going to say sexuality first. And the reason is because exposure to social media has changed the world of sexuality for our kids. And if anybody wants resources on that, I'm happy to share. But talk to them about sexuality, talk to them about their use of social media and access to things like porn and things like that. I know these are hard and difficult conversations, but they really, really need to happen. Talk to them about what they want to be doing in life and what's important to them. Talk to them about where they want to be contributing and where they can contribute, which ties me into my next topic, which everybody here listening should be familiar with, which is volunteering. There is nothing more empowering than helping other people. And there are multiple ways, and you can see them on our Good Deeds Day Facebook page and on our blog, and really everywhere. We keep putting it out there on ways to do good from home. There are lots of ways where you can today, no matter where you are in your country and your lockdown. And I know every country has different rules of what is allowed and not allowed right now. There is always a way for you to volunteer and do good for others. It'll do great things for your family bonding. It'll do great things for you and your team's sense of empowerment and feeling like you're doing something and you're contributing and not just stuck in your own space. And let's be honest, volunteering just makes us feel good because we've made a difference in somebody's lives. So I recommend this to parents all the time, even when we are not in this situation. And I think in this situation, it is even more important to find a way to do something active. And if you're in a place where you already can go out and, let's say, collect toys and take them to a nearby shelter or a nearby hospital or place that needs them, do it. If you can only do it from home, then that works as well. Let your kids and let your teens brainstorm what kinds of things they would like to do. Let them do the research. Let them go online and find what the possibilities are. Use their skills. Trust me, they're much better at it than we are.
Just to pause there. I think that's
Sure, go ahead.
A really great suggestion as well. And we'll link some of the articles that share some of the actionable ideas here in the Facebook post, so people can see that. But so many of these are great things you can do with your family, and no matter what the age of your kids are, or siblings, or as adults. I mean, there's so many things that we can do together that can better the lives of somebody else. And we can spend 10 minutes, we can spend an hour, but regardless, it's a really great way to band together and to help out during this time.
Right. And one of those things, by the way, can also be simply calling your grandparents, right? Having a regular, my sister does this with her kids. Her kids call their grandparents every day, right? They do it, sorry, from the other side, because I'll tell you in a minute what we do on our side of the family. But they call them every day just to check in on them and see how they're doing. Which leads me to the next thing. This is something we've done in our family, and it has actually been really great, because when do we actually get to connect on such a regular basis as a family? We don't. And my parents are actually the ones who started this, because they're both at an at-risk population, and so they've been very, very careful about staying inside and isolating. And so they have decided that every day at a set hour, there is a Zoom call with all the grandchildren. If the adults can join, then great. If they can't, that's okay too. And in the evening, we do an adult call to kind of catch up on things. But what's happened in the Zoom family Zoom, first of all, it's great for the cousins because they get to connect. It's great for them in terms of their connection with my parents. It's great, as a family. And what started happening, because at the first it was nice and we would talk, but then we kind of, the situation continued, right? And at some point, let's face it, we're all at home. There's only so much we can talk about. Life doesn't really change that much. And so what we started doing is every day somebody else teaches something. So we had a time period where we did cooking sessions. So before Passover, my mother taught like one of our favorite family recipes, and everybody had the ingredients in their own home and we cooked together. And then, my niece taught everybody how to make a cake in a cup in the microwave. My nephew did something else. We did, cooking lessons. And then we had a time period where we did Kahoots, right? The game Kahoot. And my parents made one up about, the history of how they met and funny things about them. And then my nephews loved it so much that each one made one about themselves. So we all had to like guess random, trivia questions about each one of them. We did ones about just general history and knowledge, all kinds of topics. We're having fun together, right? We're having fun together. We're engaging each other. It's getting each member of the family, wherever they're at, to contribute in a way that they feel that is comfortable for them and is age appropriate, right? I have a nephew that plays guitar. So it took about 3 weeks, but about 3 weeks in, and multiple requests for my father, he finally did a performance for us on his guitar, right? He's a teenager. But it allows them to grow and also really connect strongly together, which I think is one of the beautiful things that can come out of the situation that we're in. Do things together, but give time alone. Remember, we're all in confined spaces, and for some that space is bigger, and for some that space is really small. So make sure that your teens have time for themselves, have time where they're not in the same space with everyone. You want to require that certain times they are with everybody, right? That they're not isolating all the time in their room, but also give them time to be by themselves because they need it, which leads me to give time for yourself to be alone. And I know that if you are working from home and you have kids and a dog and other things, that can be really difficult to do that. I realize that is a high bar, but I think that the more we, the adults in the situation, are grounded, are able to like take a breath, the better we will be managing everything else in our lives. So really make sure to do that. And the last thing that I'm going to mention is really doing regular check-ins. So don't assume that because you checked in this morning and they were doing fine, that in the afternoon they're doing fine as well. Or that because we've gone through 3, 4, or even 8 weeks of doing really well, that tomorrow is going to be okay too. As I was saying, this is a dynamic situation and things are changing all the time. So just make sure that you're checking in. Check in with yourself, check in with others, and that will definitely help.
Thank you for sharing those tips. I think that right now this is super helpful for people to think about being in the midst of the situation. What can I do, even though we're not in the beginning? Just because we're in the middle or even towards the end doesn't mean necessarily that it's any easier. It just means that it might be different right now, and we have to keep that in mind and shift to other things. And I love the activities that your family is doing, and I think it's something that others can learn from it, maybe every day or once a week or whatever suits your family and your schedule best, to find ways to connect with each other in a fun way. That there's only so much we can catch up on, there's only so many new things going on in our lives, but find time to still have fun together. And of course by yourself too. I mean, that's a big part. Whether you're living with a bunch of people or even by yourself, there's lots of ways we can care for ourselves, and we definitely need to focus on that too.
Oh, 100%. I had a dance party one day with friends, here in Israel, in New York. We just kind of hung out, we put on some music, we were just on Zoom, and we had a dance party because why not? So just because you're alone doesn't mean you can't find ways to connect and to do this just in other ways. Absolutely.
So you mentioned a bit earlier about how important communication is. And so can you share some of those tips that you have for successful communication?
Oh, 100%. So communication is the basis of everything in our world, right? It's true at work, it's true in our family life. Um, Communication is how we get around and get along. And the reality is that communication is one of the things that as human beings we struggle with the most. And that's also because of our family models. It's also because just as humans, there's so many factors that play into it. And so what I want to try to give you is a few tips on how to be successful. And these are geared specifically to teens, but I can tell you from teaching this for many, many years that I constantly get comments from parents who are like, I use this on my boss and it worked. I'm like,
Mhm.
awesome. It really works in a lot of different ways. So the first thing that I want to say is you want to be honest when you are talking to your teens. We have um, I don't know if it's a cultural thing, and I'll be actually curious to hear, what happens in other parts of the world. But I find like the parts of the world that I have worked in, is a lot of times we try to protect our kids. And so therefore we don't share with them where we're really at, right? Or if we're struggling or having a hard time. And what I can tell you about teens and kids is they see absolutely everything. So anything that think that you are hiding from them and they don't know, they know. So whether they know for sure because they've heard it or they just have the instinct, their kids are incredible. And so the best way to approach them is to be honest and be true. You also want it to be age appropriate. They don't need to know everything. But if you're struggling, be honest and say, you know what, I'm struggling too. I haven't figured this out yet either, or I'm still trying to see what I can do. So, let's think about this together. Not only does that build trust, is that they will listen to you more because you're being real with them, right? And they don't feel like they have to put on a face or have to try to be something to please you, right? It may not look like this, but at the end of the day, all kids want their parents to love them and to be proud of them. So trust me, even if they're not behaving like this at all, this is really what they want. And so by you being honest, you're showing an example for them on how to do the same back. If things aren't going well, or even if they are and you decide you want to have a family meeting and like let's renegotiate, right, let's talk about how things are going and how we can make them better. Let your teens pick a time. Now I'm not saying let them pick a time so they say I never want to have a conversation so there won't be one, but rather let them know that you want to talk what you want to talk about, right? Because when you're coming into a communication, usually you've thought about it for a long time and you're catching the other side off guard. So let them know that you want to talk what you want to talk about and ask them what time would be convenient for them and find a time that's mutually convenient, right? So instead of saying, I want to talk to you tomorrow at 5, but 5 happens to be the time that they've set a Zoom call with their friends and then they're going to be really upset. And they may tell you and they may not tell you, right? So if they tell you, you're lucky. And if they don't tell you, they're just going to be really upset at you and you have no idea why. Make sure that you set a time in agreement, right? Let them be a part of that process. As I said, let them know what you're talking about so they can prepare, right? Again, you've thought about it, let them think about it too, and tell them, you may even want to tell them what you want them to think about. Okay, for example, how do you want to schedule your day, right? I'd like to talk about, let's say, your schoolwork. I feel like, what we can see from your grades is you're not actually getting the work done. I'm a little worried about that. I would like us to talk about it. What I'd love for you to come to the conversation with is some ideas on how we can turn things around, right? So they have time in advance to think about what to come to the meeting with. When you're having a conversation with teens, always ask whether you can share your opinion. So one of the things that kids are really, really good at is tuning adults out. There's a switch that goes on in their brain as soon as adults start talking, and they are able to kind of catch the gist of what we're saying so they can respond, but they're not really listening to us. Part of that is because we have a tendency to lecture to them, and they're not really interested in our lectures. And many other reasons. But what's important is what I have found is that if you ask the very simple question, which is, can I share with you what I think, right? Or would you like to hear my opinion? They will about 80% more listen to what you're saying. Okay, it completely changes and shifts not only the dynamic of the conversation, but whether they will actually listen to what you're saying, right? And then you want to ask them to reflect back what they heard, because what we say and what people hear is not always the same thing. In fact, it often isn't. We hear from our own lens and our own perspective. This I think is true always, which is be open and be flexible, right? In general, I think the time that we are living in requires us to be open and flexible. We need to be, if you are a person who really likes things to always be the same, that is not the world that we're living in right now. So we have to be open and flexible to change, to trying things and then not working. And I think this is one of the most valuable lessons that we can teach our teens as well, right? Because this is what they're going to need in the real world, right? They're going to have to learn how to try and fail and come back up. The reality is that we fail much more, like not even in the same amounts, right, as we succeed, right? We mostly fail and we succeed a little. That's what life looks like. And so being open and flexible and willing to accept not only what you came with and think is going to work, but what they're bringing to the conversation too will go a very long way. And I think that what's the most, not the most, but I think what I'll leave you off with is the last one, again, because I teach whole classes just on communication, is be clear on what you expect and what the next steps are, right? As we were saying before with the story that I was sharing, right? Make sure that it's not just that you've said what you had to say and we've brought up the conversation, but let's talk about what I actually expect, right? Let's say in this case, if we're talking about like attending school, so I expect you to get the work done, right? You can get it done however you want. I've seen parents who say, you know what, if you don't want to show up to the online classes, don't. I don't care. As long as you find a different way to study the material. It's up to you. I'm willing to trust you that you can do that, right? One of the things you hear from teens the most is trust me. And so you're saying, I'm willing to trust you, but for me to trust you, this is what I need to see, right? I need to see your marks go up. I need to see something tangible. So when they know what they're working towards and they can figure that out. So I'm going to leave you with that, just so we don't like spend the next 45 minutes talking about communication.
Yeah, I'm sure we could continue on and talk about that. That could be a whole session on its own, but you shared a good 5-7 tips, I think, that people can really implement now and to really keep in mind and take into consideration for their relationship. So thank you for those very practical tips. And the last thing in our few minutes that we've got left together that I love to chat about a bit is shifting from lockdown to moving out of lockdown.
Right.
What is important to keep in mind? What are you seeing? What do we need to be aware of?
Okay, so where you are in the world will depend, right, on where you are in the stages of emerging out of lockdown, or even what lockdown looks like for you, right? There are places which consider themselves under lockdown, but they can travel, let's say in America, from state to state or go visit people, right? Which for us, for example, here when we were in lockdown was not a possibility, right? We had to stay at home. So it looks different in different places. So I want you to think about where you're at as you adapt this. But the first thing that you want to know about your kids is that how they were in lockdown is going to give you insight into what's next. So for example, as I was sharing, right, this girl that I'm working with, where lockdown is fabulous for her. She's loving it. She doesn't have to have any social interaction she's not interested in. She's been able to like do things very differently in terms of her friends and who she interacts with and who she doesn't. And she loves it, right? What that means is that entering back into, having to go to school or meet up with friends and social gatherings is probably going to be more challenging for her, right? Because suddenly she's going to have to stretch that muscle that she hasn't before, right? Or a kid like the one I was sharing, right, who is struggling because he doesn't have his sports, is going to want to run out and like meet all his friends and do sports, but he may have a really hard time maintaining the safety regulations we still have to maintain, even though we're emerging out of lockdown, right? So that's going to be a real struggle. So do kind of an evaluation of an assessment of where they're at right now, so you can kind of try to think about how to help them to emerge out of this situation. What I'd like to suggest is doing a few steps, which I think, depending on where you are, no matter where you are, will work regardless. So the first part is what I call stretching mentally, right? We want to stretch that idea of what it means to go back to regular life, or more regular life, because we're not really going back to regular life. We're just going to the next stage, right?
Mhm.
So talk about what's next. Talk about what the new regulations are. See where they're at. See how they feel about it. See if they have any concerns, right? Make sure that you're allowing space for expressing fear, because a lot of times our kids don't want to show us that they're afraid because they think that we expect them to be brave. So make sure that you're allowing space for that, but talk about it, bring it up. And bring it up, when I say bring it up with teens, could be let's sit and talk about it, but usually means let's bring it up about 10 times until you actually have a real conversation. Because teens will never tell you right away what they think, and you may try about 10 to 8 times and they're going to brush you off or not be interested in the conversation, and roll their eyes, slam the doors if they're really upset. But by at some point they will open up and have a conversation, and it's important to have that conversation. That will also give you an indication of where they're at. Okay. And don't just take, like I was saying, don't just take their words for granted. Use their behavior, will give you a better indication. The next thing is really stretching physically, which is going out. So no matter, as soon as you have the ability to leave the house, even if it's just to go grocery shopping or essentials, take your kids with you. Okay, take them with you so they can experience what the new normal looks like. And don't do it one time, do it regular times. So if it's possible, go out and shop. If you can, go volunteer, go hiking, go work out, right? And working out can even be around the block, right? It doesn't have to be far, but start integrating them slowly into the new reality and what it means to be living outside of our houses after being inside for a long time. It's hard. I know for me personally, the first time I got on a bus was very stressful for me. It's still something that I honestly don't particularly like. But that's never an issue that I've ever had. I've never had a problem getting on public transportation. But things are now different. So you want to allow them to stretch physically. Remember that there's no such thing as perfect. It's not going to go smoothly. Things might go easy, and then suddenly you're going to face a wall and something's going to be really hard. And you, like I said, it may be something you totally did not expect. So just be open and ready for that, right? And if you need to, take a step back, take a deep breath, and try it again another time. Okay, but keep trying, because we have to kind of exercise these muscles again, that of things that used to be normal for us, and then suddenly we're like, no, you're not allowed, and now we have to figure out how to integrate them back into our lives. And then the two last things are have a routine and stick to a plan. And I'm just trying to be mindful of our time. So have a routine, which is, again, the things that I was suggesting, do them regularly, right? Figure out what the routine is for you. Again, if the routine is something where you know what you're doing every hour, because that's what works for you or works for your kids, great. If the routine is more something that's free flow, but we know that every day we have lunch together, which by the way was one of the things that I loved. I love to be able to take a lunch break and have lunch with my family. Then that's part of the routine, right? Everybody does their own thing. We all gather together at 1 o'clock or 1:30 to have lunch, or we all gather at 3 o'clock for the family Zoom meeting. There are certain things that we do every day because that's just the way we do them. And if you create a plan, which I suggest that you do, stick to that plan. So if we decided that today we're going to venture out and we're just going to do a little exercise around the block, that's all we're going to do. And then we decided that we're going to do that for 3 or 4 days till that feels comfortable. And then later on, we're actually going to go to a supermarket, right? Or we're going to go somewhere that actually forces us to interact with other people and practice what it means to wear your mask and to use, gel, and to just, be safe. Stick to whatever you decide, right? If you need to change the plan, but make sure that you have one, because the sense of having a plan creates a sense of safety. One of the things, and this is true, by the way, Corona time or not, we tend to think that teens don't want us to tell them what to do and don't want rules and just want to be able to do everything. That's not actually true. When we give them rules and we give them boundaries, it gives them a sense of safety. That's how they feel safe. They're going to fight against them because that's their job at this point in their lives. But it actually makes them feel really safe. And so again, having a plan and sticking to it will make your kids and will make you feel a lot more comfortable and a lot more safe. So like, I know that, we're still not working full time from the office. We're working very limited time from the office. I know that there is my day a week where I come to the office. And so I can prepare myself for what that means, right? For figuring out how I'm going to get there, figuring out what is it that I need that's going to make me feel safe going and doing the work that I need to do. And so I suggest that everyone listening figure out what those parameters are for them and help their kids figure out what they are for them, and then find a path together to slowly emerge out of to whatever the new normal is going to look like for us, because the reality is that we don't really know, and we're learning as we go along.
Great. Well, let's, I think, pause there. I'm sure there's even more things that we could continue. But Tova, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom with everybody. And thank you all that who are here. And I'm seeing you're saying hello from the comments section. It's great to see so many people from all over the world, from India and Togo in the US and Israel. It's great to have you guys all with us. And so thank you for joining. And Tova, I think these are really great tips for people to think about now and as we get into the future, and really worthwhile to, take a look back as people emerge into what the new normal will be. So thank you for your time and for sharing.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share what we call the other part of my life.
That's right. Your other
with
hat.
everyone. So thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening next week, tune in on Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be talking with the CEO of Ruach Tova, which is the volunteer center in Israel. And that's going to be a really interesting conversation about how the volunteer center, which Good Deeds Day is a part of, has shifted due to Corona, and what we see the future looking like, and how we plan to pivot and continue pivoting as an organization in the work that we do. So I think this will be super interesting and applicable for other organizations and nonprofits. So make sure you join us next week. All right. Thank you. Take care.